The distant wail of a train whistle pierced the evening air as Katherine Reynolds pressed her body deeper into the thick stalks of corn, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. Blood trickled down her temple, mingling with tears and the dirt smudged across her face. She had been running for what felt like hours, her once fine blue dress now torn and mudded, her dark hair falling loose from its pins. Every rustle in the vast Kansas cornfield sent her heart racing with fear that James Tanner and his men were closing in. Behind her lay the smoldering remains of her father's homestead. Ahead only uncertainty, and the hope that the encroaching darkness might finally provide the cover she needed to escape. Nathan Hayes had been riding back to his ranch when he spotted the smoke rising over the Reynolds property. At 32, the cattle rancher had seen his share of troubles in Whispering Creek, but nothing had prepared him for the destruction he'd found or the boot prints leading away from the scene and into Morris Peterson's cornfield. The sunset cast long shadows as he dismounted from his stallion, following the trail with his hand resting on the Colt revolver at his hip. It was 1878, and the Kansas Territory had grown more civilized in recent years, but violence still erupted like summer storms, swift and devastating. The corn whispered around him, stalks swaying in the evening breeze as Nathan tracked the footprints. Someone small had fled through here, someone running for their life. A child, perhaps. The thought quickened his pace. Then he heard a muffled sob coming from somewhere to his left. Moving carefully, he parted the tall stalks to reveal a woman huddled on the ground, arms wrapped protectively around her knees, eyes wide with terror as she stared up at him. "Miss Katherine," he whispered, immediately recognizing Edward Reynolds' daughter, though he'd only exchanged pleasantries with her the few times she'd accompanied her father into town. "Katherine Reynolds." She flinched at the sound of her name, pressing herself against the ground as if trying to disappear into the earth itself. Nathan crouched down, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He removed his hat, letting her see his face clearly in the fading light. "Miss Katherine, it's Nathan Hayes. I own the Diamond H Ranch bordering your father's property. You're safe now." Her eyes, the color of summer skies, darted past him, searching for threats. "They're coming for me," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Tanner and his men, they killed Papa." A sob broke from her throat, raw and agonized. Nathan's jaw tightened at the confirmation of what he'd feared when he'd found Edward Reynolds' body near the burning house. "Katherine," he spoke her name softly, extending his hand but not touching her. "I promise you're safe with me. I won't let them hurt you." For a long moment, she simply stared at his outstretched hand, trembling like a cornered animal. Then, with a shuddering breath, she placed her slender fingers in his calloused palm. "My father," she began. "I know," Nathan said gently, helping her to her feet. "I found him. I'm sorry, Katherine." Fresh tears streaked down her dirt-smudged face. "They wanted our land, the water rights. Papa wouldn't sell, and Tanner, he just—" Her voice broke. Nathan glanced around, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. The cornfield provided temporary cover, but if Tanner's men were searching for Katherine, they needed to move quickly. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said, guiding her toward where his horse waited at the edge of the field. "My ranch is closest. We'll figure things out from there." Katherine stumbled, her legs weak from exhaustion and shock. Without hesitation, Nathan swept her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile almost, though he sensed a core of strength beneath her terror. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "Save your strength," he replied, carrying her through the tall corn. "You're going to need it." His horse, Samson, a sturdy chestnut gelding, snorted softly as they emerged from the field. Nathan lifted Katherine into the saddle before mounting behind her. She sat stiffly at first, then gradually leaned back against his chest as exhaustion overtook her. "Hold on," he murmured, securing one arm around her waist as he guided Samson away from the cornfield, careful to choose a path that would be difficult to track. Diamond H is about an hour's ride from here. As they rode through the gathering dusk, Nathan felt Katherine's body grow heavier against him, her breathing steadying as she drifted into an exhausted sleep. He remained vigilant, eyes scanning the darkening landscape for any sign of pursuit. The rolling hills of eastern Kansas spread out around them, painted in deepening shades of purple and blue as night descended. Nathan had come to Kansas after the war, seeking peace and a fresh start after the horrors he'd witnessed as a Union soldier. For 8 years, he'd built his cattle ranch from nothing, keeping mostly to himself except for necessary business in town. He'd never intended to get involved in the water rights disputes that had been brewing between the older homesteaders like Edward Reynolds and newer arrivals like James Tanner, who had connections to the railroad companies. Now, with Katherine Reynolds asleep in his arms, her life entrusted to him, Nathan realized his solitary existence had just become considerably more complicated. The moon had risen by the time they reached the Diamond H Ranch. The main house was modest but solid, a 2-story structure of weathered wood with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Light spilled from the windows, and as they approached, the front door opened to reveal Mrs. Holloway, Nathan's housekeeper. "Mr. Hayes." The older woman called out, concern evident in her voice. "We were starting to worry." She broke off when she saw Katherine. "Good heavens, what's happened?" "Trouble at the Reynolds place," Nathan replied grimly, dismounting carefully before lifting Katherine from the saddle. She stirred slightly but didn't fully wake. "Edward's dead. His daughter needs our help." Mrs. Holloway's weathered face paled in the moonlight, but she quickly composed herself, hurrying forward to open the door wider. "Bring her in. I'll prepare the spare room." Nathan carried Katherine inside, following Mrs. Holloway up the stairs to a small but comfortable bedroom. As he laid her gently on the bed, her eyes fluttered open, momentary panic flashing across her face. "You're at my ranch," Nathan assured her quickly. "This is Mrs. Holloway, my housekeeper. You're safe here." Katherine's gaze darted around the unfamiliar room before settling back on Nathan's face. Some of the tension left her body. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll fetch some water and clean linens," Mrs. Holloway said, already moving toward the door. "And perhaps some of my night clothes might fit the poor dear." When they were alone, Katherine struggled to sit up. "Mr. Hayes, Nathan," he corrected gently. "Nathan," she repeated, her voice steadying. "Tanner will come looking for me. I heard them talking. They need me to sign over Papa's land since I'm his only heir. When I refused—" She touched the dried blood on her temple. Nathan's expression hardened. "James Tanner might have friends on the railroad, but he's not above the law. What he's done is murder, plain and simple. The law." Katherine gave a bitter laugh that seemed out of place coming from her delicate features. "Sheriff Wilson takes money from Tanner. He won't help." Nathan couldn't deny the truth in her words. The local sheriff had shown little interest in curbing Tanner's increasingly aggressive tactics to acquire land along the proposed railroad route. "Then we'll go to the federal marshal in Topeka," Nathan said. "But first, you need rest and time to recover." Mrs. Holloway returned with water, bandages, and a cotton nightgown. "I'll help Miss Reynolds get cleaned up," she said firmly. "And you, Mr. Hayes, should see to your horse and alert the men. If there's trouble coming, they should be prepared." Nathan nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the housekeeper's words. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," he told Katherine. Downstairs, Nathan found his foreman, Tom Riley, warming his hands by the fire. The grizzled cowhan looked up as Nathan entered. "Saw you ride in with a woman," Tom said without preamble. "Trouble?" "Edward Reynolds is dead," Nathan replied, pouring himself a measure of whiskey from the decanter on the sideboard. "His daughter Katherine witnessed it. James Tanner and his men are responsible." Tom let out a low whistle. "That's bold, even for Tanner. What's your plan, boss?" Nathan took a sip of whiskey, feeling the burn down his throat. "Keep her safe until we can get word to the federal marshal in Topeka. Double the night watch and make sure everyone's armed. You think Tanner will come here?" "I think Tanner isn't the type to leave loose ends," Nathan replied grimly. "And Katherine Reynolds is a very significant loose end." Tom nodded, already moving toward the door. "I'll spread the word to the boys. We've got 6 hands on the property tonight, should be enough for a watch rotation." After Tom left, Nathan sank into an armchair, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. Edward Reynolds had been a good man, hardworking, honest, stubborn as they came when it came to his principles. The kind of neighbor you wanted watching your back. And now he was gone, leaving his daughter alone in a dangerous situation. Katherine. Nathan's thoughts returned to the woman upstairs. There was something about her that had struck him from the moment he found her in that cornfield, not just her beauty, though she possessed that in abundance despite the dirt and blood, but a sense of determination beneath her fear. She hadn't completely broken under circumstances that would have shattered many. Mrs. Holloway's footsteps on the stairs interrupted his thoughts. The housekeeper looked tired but satisfied as she entered the room. "She's resting now," she reported. "That gash on her head isn't as bad as it looked. Head wounds always bleed something fierce. I've cleaned and bandaged it. The poor girl is exhausted, though, both in body and spirit." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway." The older woman fixed him with a stern look. "Now what's this Tom tells me about expecting trouble? Should I be packing my things?" "No need for that yet," Nathan assured her. "But Tanner and his men might come looking for Miss Reynolds. I've asked Tom to double the night watch, Mrs." Holloway nodded, seemingly unperturbed by the prospect of danger. Having survived the border wars before and during the Civil War, the housekeeper was made of stern stuff. "Well then, I'd best prepare some food for the men if they're standing extra watches tonight. And you should get some rest yourself, Mr. Hayes. You look dead on your feet." Nathan smiled faintly. "I'll check on our guest first." Upstairs, he knocked softly on the spare room door. When there was no answer, he carefully opened it a crack. Katherine lay asleep in the bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face now clean of dirt and blood, peaceful in slumber. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated her features, and Nathan found himself struck again by how young she looked. No more than 22 or 23, he guessed. He was about to close the door when her eyes suddenly opened, finding his in the darkness with startling clarity. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to wake you." "I wasn't really asleep," she admitted, her voice steadier than it had been earlier. "Every time I close my eyes, I see," she broke off, swallowing hard. Nathan stepped into the room but remained near the door. "It helps sometimes to talk about it." Katherine sat up, drawing the blanket around her shoulders. "Have you ever seen someone die, Mr. Hayes?" "Nathan," he reminded her gently. "And yes, too many times during the war." She studied him for a moment. "Were you there at Gettysburg?" "Papa was. No, I was further west, mostly. Missouri, Arkansas." He didn't elaborate on the brutality of the guerrilla fighting he'd witnessed. "Your father fought for the Union," Katherine nodded. "He never talked about it much, said some memories are best left buried." She looked down at her hands, twisting in the blanket. "He taught me to shoot, you know. Said a woman alone on the frontier needed to know how to protect herself." Nathan raised an eyebrow, reassessing the seemingly delicate woman before him. "Are you any good?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Better than Papa with a rifle at least. Not that it helped today, they came so suddenly. The smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Get some rest, Nathan urged. You're safe tonight. We'll figure out our next steps in the morning. She nodded, settling back against the pillows. Thank you, Nathan, for finding me. For bringing me here. Try to sleep, he said softly, withdrawing from the room and closing the door behind him. In his own bedroom across the hall, Nathan removed his gun, belt, and boots but kept his clothes on, ready to move quickly if needed. He stretched out on his bed, staring at the ceiling, sleep elusive despite his exhaustion. His mind kept returning to Katherine, the terror in her eyes when he first found her, the surprising strength he'd glimpsed beneath her vulnerability, the way she'd said his name before he left her room. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. Familiar sounds of the Kansas night that usually soothed him. Tonight, they only reminded him of the vastness of the territory, how easy it was for men like Tanner to act with impunity, far from the reach of proper law. Nathan eventually drifted into a light, troubled sleep, his hand never straying far from the revolver he'd placed on the bedside table. Dawn broke with the distant sound of hoofbeats. Nathan was instantly awake, moving to the window with his Colt in hand. Relief washed over him as he recognized the riders approaching, just Tom and two of the ranch hands returning from their patrol of the property perimeter. He dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Mrs. Holloway already up, stoking the kitchen fire and preparing breakfast. "Any trouble in the night?" she asked, looking up from the stove. "Not that I'm aware of," Nathan replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot warming on the stove. "But Tom's just riding in. He might have news." The foreman entered the kitchen moments later, removing his hat and nodding a greeting to Mrs. Holloway. "No sign of anyone on our land," he reported, but Myers rode into town at first light to ask around quietly. "There's word that Tanner's offering $50 for information about Miss Reynolds' whereabouts." Nathan frowned. $50 was a substantial sum, enough to tempt many in the struggling farming community. Did Myers hear anything about a federal marshal? Tom shook his head. Nothing. But he did confirm that Sheriff Wilson was seen drinking with Tanner's men last night at the saloon. "Just as Miss Reynolds said," Mrs. Holloway muttered disapprovingly, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet with unnecessary force. A soft sound from the doorway drew their attention. Katherine stood there, dressed in the same torn blue dress from yesterday, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. The bruise on her temple had darkened overnight, stark against her pale skin. "Good morning," she said, her voice stronger than it had been the previous night. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, dear," Mrs. Holloway said warmly. "Come sit down. You must be famished." Katherine moved to the table, her posture straight and dignified despite her circumstances. "I couldn't help overhearing. Tanner is looking for me." Nathan nodded, not seeing any point in shielding her from the truth. "Yes, but no one knows you're here and my men are trustworthy." She met his gaze steadily. "I can't stay and put you all in danger, not after you've already done so much for me. And where exactly do you plan to go?" Nathan challenged gently. Katherine hesitated. "I have an aunt in St. Louis. I could try to reach her." "St. Louis is over 300 miles east," Nathan pointed out. "How would you get there?" "I have a little money saved," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Mrs. Holloway placed a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Katherine. "Eat first, dear. Decisions are better made on a full stomach." Katherine looked like she wanted to argue further, but instead picked up her fork and began to eat, her hunger apparently overcoming her resolve. Nathan watched her for a moment, then turned to Tom. "I want you to ride to Topeka, find Federal Marshal Wilson and tell him what's happened. Tell him we have a witness to Edward Reynolds' murder." Tom nodded. That's a 2-day ride, boss. 3 days before I could be back with the marshal. We'll manage until then, Nathan assured him. Take Samson, he's the fastest horse in the stable. After breakfast, Tom departed for Topeka, and Nathan took Katherine to his study at the back of the house. Maps of the territory covered one wall, and a large oak desk dominated the room. I need to understand exactly what happened yesterday, he said, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather chairs by the unlit fireplace. Every detail you can remember. Katherine's hands twisted in her lap, but her voice remained steady as she recounted the events of the previous day. Papa and I were having supper when they rode up. 5 men: Tanner, his foreman Miller, and 3 others I didn't recognize. Tanner said he had papers for Papa to sign, transferring our water rights to him. She drew a deep breath before continuing. Papa refused like he always did. Said our stream fed the best grazing land on our property, and without it, the farm would be worthless. Tanner got angry. Said the railroad was coming through whether Papa liked it or not, and he could either sell now and get something for his trouble or lose everything when they diverted the stream anyway. Nathan nodded grimly. The tactics sounded familiar. Tanner had been buying up land along the proposed railroad route for months, sometimes through legitimate means, sometimes through intimidation. What happened next? He prompted when Katherine fell silent. Papa told them to get off our land. He had his shotgun, didn't point it at them, just held it. That's when Miller drew his pistol. Everything happened so fast after that. Her voice wavered slightly. They shot Papa. He fell right there at the table. Then Tanner turned to me, all calm-like, and said I needed to be sensible where my father hadn't been. Said I should sign the papers, and they'd tell everyone Papa's death was an accident. Her blue eyes, now dry of tears, met Nathan's. When I refused, Miller hit me with his gun. I fell, pretended to be knocked out. They started arguing about what to do with me. Tanner said they should take me somewhere to reconsider my decision. One of the other men suggested burning the house to cover up what they'd done. While they were arguing, I slipped out the back door and ran. I heard shots behind me, but I didn't stop. I just ran until I couldn't anymore. That's when I hid in Mr. Peterson's cornfield. Nathan's jaw tightened as he listened. The cold calculation of it all, the murder, the attempted coercion, the planned abduction, spoke to a level of corruption that went beyond simple land grabbing. Katherine, he said carefully, would you be willing to testify to all this before a federal judge? Yes, she replied without hesitation. For Papa, I would. It won't be easy. Men like Tanner have connections, money. I don't care, she said, a flash of fire in her eyes. He killed my father. He needs to answer for that. Nathan studied her for a moment, impressed by her resolve. Then we keep you safe until Tom returns with the marshal. In the meantime, you should stay inside or close to the house. Most of my men don't know you're here, and I'd like to keep it that way. Fewer people who know, fewer chances of word getting back to Tanner. Katherine nodded her understanding. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, Nathan assured her. Besides, your father was a good neighbor. Helping you is the least I can do. A slight smile touched her lips. Papa spoke well of you too, said you were one of the few honest men in the territory. The compliment caught Nathan off guard, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. He cleared his throat. Your father was a good judge of character, except perhaps when it came to Tanner. None of us saw how dangerous he truly was, Katherine said softly. Not until it was too late. For the next 2 days, Katherine remained at the Diamond H Ranch, gradually regaining her strength. Mrs. Holloway provided her with some simple dresses that had belonged to her daughter, now married and living in Wichita. Though still wary and prone to startling at sudden noises, Katherine began to help around the house, seemingly grateful for tasks that kept her mind occupied. Nathan found himself increasingly aware of her presence, the soft sound of her voice as she spoke with Mrs. Holloway in the kitchen, the scent of lavender that somehow clung to her despite everything, the way sunlight caught in her dark hair when she ventured onto the porch in the afternoons. He told himself it was simply concern for her safety, nothing more. On the evening of the second day, Nathan was reviewing his cattle ledgers in the study when Katherine appeared in the doorway, a steaming cup in her hands. "Mrs. Holloway thought you might want some coffee," she said, stepping into the room. "Thank you," Nathan replied, setting aside his pen and accepting the cup. "Please, sit if you'd like." Katherine settled into the chair across from his desk, smoothing the skirt of her borrowed dress, a simple gray cotton that nonetheless complemented her slender figure. "How are you holding up?" he asked after taking a sip of the strong black coffee. "Better, I think," she said, her fingers absently tracing the faded pattern on the chair's armrest. "The nightmares aren't quite as bad. That's good." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the occasional pop from the fireplace. "May I ask you something?" Katherine finally said. Nathan nodded, curious. "Why did you follow those tracks into the cornfield?" "You must have known it could be dangerous." The question caught him by surprise. "I saw the smoke from your farm, found your father. I couldn't just ride away knowing someone might need help." Katherine studied him, her blue eyes thoughtful. "Many men would have. Especially knowing Tanner might be involved." "I'm not many men," Nathan said simply. "No," she agreed softly. "You're not." Something in her tone made him look up sharply. Their eyes met across the desk, and for a moment neither spoke. Nathan found himself noticing details he'd overlooked before: the dusting of freckles across her nose, the slight curl at the ends of her dark hair, the gentle curve of her lips. The spell was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats, approaching fast. Nathan was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "Stay here," he instructed, drawing his revolver and striding toward the front of the house. Mrs. Holloway was already at the front door, peering out into the gathering dusk. "2 riders," she reported as Nathan joined her. "Coming in hard." Nathan positioned himself beside the window, gun ready. "Get back to the kitchen," he told Mrs. Holloway. "Make sure Katherine stays in the study." The housekeeper nodded and withdrew as the riders thundered into the yard. Relief washed over Nathan as he recognized Tom Riley's stocky figure dismounting from a lathered Samson. The second rider was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a long duster and a wide-brimmed hat, a federal marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. Nathan opened the door as the 2 men reached the porch. "Tom, Marshal, thank you for coming so quickly." Federal Marshal Daniel Bennett removed his hat, revealing a weathered face framed by iron-gray hair. "Mr. Hayes, your man here filled me in on the basics. Said you've got a witness to Edward Reynolds' murder." "Yes, his daughter Katherine. She's inside." The marshal nodded grimly. "Best I talk to her right away. James Tanner has friends in high places, including the territorial governor. The sooner we get sworn testimony, the better." Nathan led the men into the house, sending Tom to the kitchen for food and coffee before taking Marshal Bennett to the study. Katherine rose as they entered, her face paling slightly at the sight of the unfamiliar man. "Miss Reynolds, this is Federal Marshal Daniel Bennett from Topeka," Nathan introduced them. "Marshal, Miss Katherine Reynolds." Bennett stepped forward, his manner gentler than his imposing appearance might suggest. "Miss Reynolds, I'm sorry about your father. He was a fine man. You knew him?" Katherine asked, surprise evident in her voice. "We served together briefly during the war," Bennett explained. Lost touch after, but I remembered the name when Mr. Riley here told me what happened. He gestured to a chair. May I? Katherine nodded, resuming her own seat as Bennett settled his large frame into a chair across from her. Nathan remained standing, leaning against the door frame. I need you to tell me everything that happened, Miss Reynolds, the marshal said, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. Every detail you can remember. For the second time, Katherine recounted the events that had led to her father's death and her flight through the cornfield. Her voice was stronger this time, more controlled, though Nathan noticed how tightly her hands were clasped in her lap. Bennett took notes throughout her testimony, occasionally asking for clarification, but otherwise letting her speak uninterrupted. When she finished, he reviewed his notes before looking up at her again. Miss Reynolds, would you be willing to swear to all this before a judge? Yes, sir, I would. The marshal nodded, satisfied. Then I'll need you to come with me to Topeka tomorrow. Your testimony, combined with the evidence we gather at your father's property, should be enough to issue arrest warrants for Tanner and his men. Topeka, Nathan stepped forward, concern evident in his voice. Is that safe? Tanner's still looking for her. Safer than keeping her here, Bennett replied frankly. Tanner's men have been asking questions all around the county. Won't be long before someone puts together that she might be at Diamond H. In Topeka, I can place her under federal protection until the trial. Katherine looked between the two men. How long would I need to stay in Topeka? Hard to say, Bennett admitted. Could be weeks before we bring Tanner to trial, depending on how quickly we can round up him and his accomplices. A shadow passed over Katherine's face at the prospect of weeks in an unfamiliar city, but she nodded resolutely. If that's what it takes to see justice done for my father, I'll go. We'll leave at first light, the marshal decided, pocketing his notebook. Best if we travel quickly and quietly. Later that night, after Bennett and Tom had retired to the guest rooms prepared by Mrs. Holloway, Nathan found Katherine on the back porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. A cool breeze carried the scent of prairie grass and distant rain. You should get some rest, he said, moving to stand beside her at the railing. It's a long ride to Topeka. I know, she replied, not looking at him. I just wanted some air, some time to think. Nathan studied her profile in the moonlight, having second thoughts. No. She shook her head firmly. Not about testifying, just... She trailed off, seeming to search for words. Just what? Katherine turned to face him then, her expression unreadable in the dim light. I wanted to thank you, Nathan, for everything, finding me, bringing me here, sending for the marshal. Most men wouldn't have gotten involved. Most men haven't seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing, he replied quietly. She studied him for a moment. You carry a lot of ghosts from the war, don't you? The perceptiveness of her observation startled him. Some, he admitted. Don't we all? I suppose we do now. A sad smile touched her lips. When I go to Topeka tomorrow, I'm going with you, Nathan interrupted, the decision crystallizing in his mind even as he spoke the words. Surprise flickered across Katherine's face. You don't have to do that. The marshal, Bennett, is a good man, but he's one man. Tanner has plenty of hired guns. I'd feel better if I went along, at least until you're settled safely in Topeka. What about your ranch? Tom can handle things for a few days. Nathan shrugged. Besides, I need to make a supply run to Topeka anyway. It wasn't entirely true, but it gave him a practical reason beyond his growing concern for her safety and his reluctance to see her leave. Katherine looked as though she might argue further, but instead simply nodded. Thank you. They stood in companionable silence for a few minutes, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them, crickets chirping, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft nickering of horses in the stable. I should go in, Katherine finally said, though she made no move to leave. As you said, it's a long ride tomorrow. Katherine, Nathan began, then hesitated, unsure what he wanted to say. There was something about her that had gotten under his skin in the short time she'd been at Diamond, a quiet strength, a dignity in the face of tragedy, a perceptiveness that saw past his carefully constructed reserve. She looked up at him expectantly, her blue eyes reflecting the starlight. "Be careful in Topeka," he finally said. "Even with federal protection, Tanner's influence reaches far." "I will," she promised. Then, in a gesture that caught him entirely off guard, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Nathan." Before he could respond, she was gone, disappearing through the back door and leaving him standing alone on the porch, the ghost of her kiss burning against his skin. The journey to Topeka began before dawn the next morning. Katherine, dressed in one of Mrs. Holloway's daughter's riding outfits, sat astride a gentle mare from Nathan's stable. Marshal Bennett led the way, with Nathan bringing up the rear, all three riding at a steady pace that ate up the miles while preserving their horses' strength. They avoided the main roads, taking less traveled paths through the rolling Kansas landscape. The day grew warm as the sun climbed higher, the July heat shimmering off the vast expanse of prairie grass that stretched to the horizon. They spoke little, saving their energy for the long ride ahead. By midday, they had covered nearly 20 miles. They stopped briefly at a small creek to water the horses and eat the provisions Mrs. Holloway had packed: cold biscuits, strips of dried beef, and apples. "How much further to Topeka?" Katherine asked, splashing cool water on her face from the creek. "Another 30 miles or so," Bennett replied, checking his pocket watch. "We'll need to find shelter for the night. There's a way station about 10 miles ahead where we can stop." Nathan, who had been scanning the horizon, suddenly stiffened. "Riders coming. From the east." Bennett was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his revolver. "How many?" "3, maybe 4, Nathan replied, reaching for the rifle strapped to his saddle. "Too far to tell if it's Tanner's men." "We can't take chances," the marshal decided. "Miss Reynolds, mount up. We'll head west, try to lose them in those hills." Katherine moved quickly to her horse, any fatigue forgotten in the face of potential danger. Within moments, they were riding hard toward a line of low hills visible in the distance, pushing their mounts to a gallop. Nathan glanced back after a few minutes. The distant riders had changed course, now clearly in pursuit. "They've spotted us," he called to Bennett. The marshal nodded grimly. "The hills are our best chance. There's a ravine I know where we can take cover, maybe set up an ambush if needed." They rode for another mile before Bennett led them into a winding ravine cut into the rolling landscape, its steep sides offering some protection from view. The horses' hooves kicked up dust as they navigated the narrow passage, finally emerging into a small canyon where a trickle of a stream provided water. "We'll make our stand here if necessary," Bennett decided, dismounting and helping Katherine from her horse. "Get behind those rocks," he instructed her, pointing to a formation of boulders near the canyon wall. "Stay down." Nathan unslung his rifle, checking that it was loaded before taking position behind a fallen tree trunk that provided a clear view of the ravine entrance. Bennett crouched nearby, revolver drawn. "Could be innocent travelers," Nathan remarked, though he didn't believe it himself. "Could be," Bennett agreed skeptically. "But in my experience, innocent travelers don't change course to pursue strangers across open country." They didn't have long to wait. The sound of approaching horses echoed through the ravine, and minutes later, 3 riders appeared at the entrance to the canyon. Nathan recognized Miller, Tanner's foreman, leading the group. All 3 men carried rifles. "That's far enough," Bennett called out, his voice ringing with authority. "Federal Marshal, state your business." The riders pulled up short, momentarily surprised by the challenge. Miller recovered quickly, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "No business with you, Marshal," he replied. "We're just looking for a young woman who went missing a few days back. Her family's worried sick." "Is that so?" Bennett's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word. "And who might this young woman be?" Miller's eyes scanned the canyon, searching. "Katherine Reynolds, daughter of Edward Reynolds, God rest his soul. Poor man had a terrible accident at his farm. Fire took the place. We think the girl might be confused, frightened, running from imagined dangers." Nathan's finger tightened on his rifle's trigger. The casual way Miller spoke of Edward's murder made his blood boil. "That's an interesting story," Bennett said evenly. "Especially since I've taken Miss Reynolds' sworn statement regarding her father's murder at the hands of James Tanner and several accomplices, including a man matching your description." Miller's expression hardened. "The girl's lying. Tanner was nowhere near the Reynolds place that day." "We'll let a federal judge decide who's lying," Bennett replied. "Now turn around and ride out of here, or I'll place you under arrest right now for obstruction of justice and suspicion of murder." For a tense moment, it seemed Miller might order his men to attack. Nathan sighted down his rifle, centering it on Miller's chest, ready to fire at the first hostile move. Then Miller laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "Have it your way, Marshal, but Tanner won't be happy. He's got friends in high places higher than some backwater federal lawman." "Your threats don't impress me," Bennett said coldly. "Now go." With a final, searching look around the canyon, Miller wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he called back as he and his men rode away. Nathan kept his rifle trained on the ravine entrance until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he lower his weapon and release the breath he'd been holding. "They'll be back," he said, turning to Bennett, "with more men." The marshal nodded grimly. "Which is why we're not staying here." He moved to where Katherine was crouching behind the rocks, her face pale but composed. "You all right, Miss Reynolds?" "Yes," she replied, standing up and brushing dust from her skirt. "That was Miller. He was there when they killed Papa." "I know," Bennett said gently, "and he'll answer for it. But first, we need to get you safely to Topeka. We'll rest the horses for an hour, then take a different route, longer but less exposed." As Katherine moved to tend to her mare, Nathan approached Bennett, keeping his voice low. "Miller's right about one thing. Tanner has powerful friends." "I'm counting on it," Bennett replied, surprising Nathan. "The bigger they are, the harder they fall. If Tanner's corruption reaches as high as I suspect, this case could break open land fraud schemes across the territory. And Katherine becomes an even bigger target," Nathan pointed out. Bennett studied him for a moment. "You care about her." It wasn't a question, and Nathan didn't bother denying it. "She's been through enough. I don't want to see her used as bait in some larger game." "Neither do I," the marshal assured him. "But her testimony is crucial. Without it, Tanner walks free." Nathan knew Bennett was right, but it did little to ease his concern for Katherine's safety. He glanced over to where she stood with her horse, one hand gently stroking the mare's neck, her posture betraying no hint of the fear she must be feeling. "We'll protect her," Bennett said, following Nathan's gaze. "I give you my word." They rested for the promised hour, eating sparingly from their provisions and allowing the horses to drink from the small stream. Katherine sat apart from the men, her expression thoughtful as she gazed out at the canyon walls. Nathan approached her, offering his canteen. "Water." She accepted it with a small smile. "Thank you." After taking a sip, she handed it back. "Do you think they'll come back, Miller and his men?" "Yes," Nathan answered honestly, seeing no point in shielding her from the truth. "But we'll be long gone by then." Katherine nodded, unsurprised by his assessment. "I never thought it would come to this," she said quietly. "Papa just wanted to keep our farm, the land he'd worked for years. And now—" She trailed off, blinking rapidly against tears. Nathan sat beside her on the sun-warmed rock. "Your father was a principled man. He wouldn't have wanted you to give up." "I know," she replied, drawing a deep breath to compose herself. "And I won't. I'll see this through for him." She turned to look at Nathan directly. "But I'm afraid, Nathan, not just for myself, for you and the Marshal. Tanner won't stop until he gets what he wants." "Neither will we," Nathan said firmly. "And for what it's worth, I've faced worse odds in my time." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "During the war and after," he admitted. "The years right after the war were difficult." Katherine studied him, her blue eyes perceptive. "You don't talk about it much, do you? The war, I mean." "No," Nathan said simply. "Some memories are best left buried, as your father used to say." She nodded in understanding. "Papa was the same way. But sometimes, in the winter when it was just the two of us by the fire, he'd tell stories. Not about the fighting, but about the men he served with. Their courage, their humor in dark times." Her voice softened with remembrance. "He said the measure of a person isn't found in easy times, but in how they face adversity." "Your father was a wise man." "Yes," she agreed. "He would have liked you, I think. Really known you, I mean, not just as a neighboring rancher." Something in her tone made Nathan look at her more closely. There was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a connection forming between them that went beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. Before he could respond, Bennett approached, interrupting the moment. "Time to move out," the Marshal announced. "I want to put as much distance as possible between us and this place before nightfall." They mounted up and rode out through a narrow passage at the back of the canyon, Bennett leading them on a circuitous route that took advantage of the rolling terrain to conceal their movements. The day wore on, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon as they pushed their tired horses onward. By dusk, they had reached a small homestead owned by friends of Bennett's, a middle-aged couple named Thomas and Sarah Cooper, who welcomed them without question when the Marshal explained they needed shelter for the night. "Any friend of Daniel's is welcome here," Sarah Cooper declared, ushering them into the modest cabin. "I'll heat up some stew, and Thomas will see to your horses." The simple one-room cabin was clean and comfortable, with a stone fireplace at one end and a curtained-off sleeping area at the other. After a meal of hearty venison stew and cornbread, Sarah insisted that Katherine take the bed while the men spread their bedrolls on the floor near the fire. Despite the day's long ride and the tension of their encounter with Miller, Nathan found sleep elusive. He lay awake, listening to the soft crackle of the dying fire and the occasional cry of a night bird outside. Across the room, Bennett's steady breathing indicated the Marshal had no such troubles with slumber. A soft movement caught Nathan's attention. Katherine, apparently also unable to sleep, slipped from behind the curtain and moved quietly to the cabin's single window, looking out at the star-filled sky. The moonlight illuminated her profile, and Nathan was struck again by her quiet beauty and dignity. As if sensing his gaze, she turned, her eyes finding his in the dim light. She offered a small smile before returning to the bed, disappearing once more behind the curtain. Nathan rolled onto his back, staring at the cabin's rough-hewn ceiling. Tomorrow they would reach Topeka, and Katherine would be placed under federal protection. His practical reason for accompanying them would be fulfilled. Yet the thought of leaving her, of returning to his ranch while she faced the dangers ahead alone, sat uneasily in his chest. He finally drifted into a restless sleep, his dreams filled with cornfields and the sound of Katherine's voice speaking his name. They reached Topeka the following afternoon, the territorial capital's buildings a stark contrast to the open prairie they'd traversed. Bennett led them directly to the federal courthouse, a substantial brick structure in the center of town. "I'll get Miss Reynolds settled in the protected housing we maintain for witnesses," Bennett explained as they dismounted. "There's a deputy marshal assigned to guard duty at all times." Nathan nodded, helping Katherine down from her horse. She winced slightly as her feet touched the ground, stiff from 2 days of hard riding. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Just sore," she assured him with a small smile. "Nothing a hot bath won't cure." Bennett had already started toward the courthouse steps, motioning for them to follow. Inside, the building was cool and quiet, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor as they made their way to Bennett's office. "Wait here," the marshal instructed, gesturing to a bench outside his door. "I need to arrange for the safe house and speak with Judge Harmon about taking Miss Reynolds' formal deposition." When they were alone, Katherine turned to Nathan. "You don't have to stay, you know. You've already done more than enough." Nathan studied her face, noting the determined set of her jaw despite the fatigue evident in her eyes. "I'd like to see you safely settled before I head back." She smiled gratefully. "Thank you for everything." Before he could respond, the office door opened, and Bennett emerged with another man, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "Miss Reynolds, Mr. Hayes, this is Judge William Harmon," Bennett introduced them. "He'll be handling the case against Tanner." Judge Harmon stepped forward, extending his hand first to Katherine. "Miss Reynolds, I'm deeply sorry about your father. Edward Reynolds was known to me as a man of integrity." "Thank you, Your Honor," Katherine replied, shaking his hand. The judge turned to Nathan. "Mr. Hayes, Marshal Bennett speaks highly of your assistance in this matter." "I just did what anyone would do," Nathan said, uncomfortable with the praise. "Hardly," Harmon replied with a knowing look. "In my experience, most people prefer to mind their own business, especially when James Tanner is involved." He turned back to Katherine. "Miss Reynolds, I'd like to take your formal deposition as soon as possible, tomorrow morning if you're not too fatigued from your journey." "I'll be ready," Katherine assured him. Bennett nodded approvingly. "Good. I've arranged for a room at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house on Pine Street. It's where we typically house witnesses under protection. Deputy Marshal Collins will be on guard duty." "And Mr. Hayes?" Katherine asked, glancing at Nathan. "There's room at the boarding house if he wishes to stay," Bennett replied, looking to Nathan for confirmation. Nathan hesitated. He'd planned to return to Diamond H after seeing Katherine safely settled, but the thought of leaving her now, in an unfamiliar city with Tanner's men potentially still in pursuit, made him uneasy. "I'd like to stay," he decided. "At least until after Miss Reynolds gives her deposition." Katherine's relief was visible, though she quickly masked it. "Thank you." Mrs. Hollister's boarding house proved to be a neat, 2-story building on a quiet street several blocks from the courthouse. The widow who ran it greeted Bennett with familiar warmth before showing Katherine and Nathan to their rooms on the 2nd floor. Deputy Marshal Collins, a young but capable-looking man, took up position in the hallway outside Katherine's door. "I'll return for you at 9 tomorrow morning, Miss Reynolds," Bennett said as they prepared to leave her to rest. "Judge Harmon will take your deposition then." Katherine nodded, her composure intact despite the emotional and physical toll of the past days. "I'll be ready." When Bennett departed, Nathan lingered briefly at Katherine's door. "If you need anything, I'm just across the hall." She smiled tiredly. "I know, thank you, Nathan." He wanted to say more to reassure her, to promise that everything would be all right, but the words felt hollow in the face of the dangers still ahead. Instead, he simply nodded and retreated to his own room. Later that evening, after a simple dinner served in the boarding house's dining room, Nathan sat on the small porch, watching as the streets of Topeka quieted with the approaching night. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of summer flowers from Mrs. Hollister's garden. The sound of the door opening behind him drew his attention. Katherine stepped onto the porch, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a borrowed dress that Mrs. Hollister had provided, simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. "May I join you?" she asked. "Of course." Nathan moved to make room for her on the porch swing. She sat beside him, close enough that he could catch the faint scent of lavender soap. For a while, they simply sat in companionable silence, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound. "Are you nervous? About tomorrow?" Nathan finally asked. Katherine considered the question. "Not about giving my testimony," she said. "I know what I saw. I'm more worried about what comes after. The trial," she nodded. "Judge Harmon said it could be weeks, even months before Tanner is brought to trial, assuming they can arrest him. That's a long time to live in limbo, waiting." "What will you do? After it's all over, I mean." Katherine sighed softly. "I don't know. The farm is gone. Even if I could rebuild, I don't think I could live there again. Not after." She trailed off, then continued more resolutely. "I have my aunt in St. Louis. I could go there, I suppose." The thought of Katherine leaving Kansas, disappearing from his life as suddenly as she had entered it, left Nathan with an unexpected hollowness in his chest. "You could stay," he suggested, the words out before he could consider them fully. "In Kansas, I mean. Start fresh somewhere." She turned to look at him, studying his face in the dim light from the window. "Where would I go? What would I do?" "You could." Nathan hesitated, then continued more carefully. "Diamond H is a big ranch. There's always work to be done, and Mrs. Holloway would welcome the company." A small smile touched Katherine's lips. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Hayes? If that's what you want to call it," he replied, suddenly feeling out of his depth. "I just meant I know what you meant," she said gently, her hand coming to rest lightly on his arm. "And I appreciate it, truly. But I can't impose on your kindness indefinitely." "It wouldn't be an imposition," Nathan said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Katherine, these past few days, having you at Diamond H." He struggled to find the right words, to express the unexpected feelings that had grown within him since finding her in that Cornfield. Feelings he thought himself incapable of after the war had left him scarred in ways that weren't visible on the outside. Katherine's eyes softened, understanding what he couldn't quite say. "I've felt it too," she admitted quietly. "A connection, something unexpected in the midst of all this tragedy." Nathan covered her hand with his own, rough calluses against her smooth skin. "Then consider my offer, please. Not out of obligation or gratitude, but because maybe there's something worth exploring between us when all this is over." For a long moment, Katherine simply looked at him, her blue eyes searching his face. Then, with a gentle movement that took him by surprise, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a soft, brief kiss. "I'll consider it," she whispered as she drew back, a hint of color in her cheeks. Before Nathan could respond, the boarding house door opened again, and Deputy Collins stepped onto the porch, his hand moving instinctively to his gun before he recognized them. "Evening, folks," he said, relaxing slightly. "Just checking the perimeter." The moment broken, Katherine stood. "I should get some rest before tomorrow. Good night, Nathan, Deputy." As she disappeared inside, Collins gave Nathan a knowing look. "Marshal Bennett mentioned you two had gotten close during your journey. Is that a problem?" Nathan asked, more defensively than he intended. Collins shrugged. "Not for me. Just remember she's a witness in a high-profile case. Tanner has eyes everywhere in this territory. Best to keep your head clear." The deputy's warning, though delivered casually, served as a stark reminder of the dangers still surrounding Katherine. Nathan's concern for her safety, already substantial, deepened as he realized how much she had come to mean to him in such a short time. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Nathan accompanied Katherine and Deputy Collins to the courthouse, where Marshal Bennett was waiting. Katherine, dressed in the same blue dress from the previous evening but with her hair neatly pinned up, looked composed and determined as they climbed the courthouse steps. "Are you ready?" Nathan asked quietly as they paused at the entrance. Katherine nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Yes." "For Papa." Judge Harmon received them in his chambers, a dignified room lined with law books and furnished with heavy oak pieces. A court clerk sat ready with pen and paper to record Katherine's testimony. "Please be seated, Miss Reynolds," the judge said kindly, gesturing to a chair positioned before his desk. "This is an informal proceeding to record your deposition regarding the events at your father's farm. Just tell us exactly what happened in your own words." For the third time, Katherine recounted the details of her father's murder and her subsequent escape. Her voice remained steady throughout, faltering only when describing the moment her father was shot. Nathan, standing near the door with Bennett, felt a surge of admiration for her composure and courage. When she finished, Judge Harmon asked several clarifying questions before nodding in satisfaction. "Thank you, Miss Reynolds. Your testimony is compelling and consistent. Based on this and the evidence Marshal Bennett has gathered, I am prepared to issue arrest warrants for James Tanner and his associates on charges of murder, attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy." Katherine's relief was visible. "When will they be arrested?" Bennett stepped forward. "I'm assembling a team of deputies. We'll ride out tomorrow to serve the warrants." "And until then," Nathan asked, concern evident in his voice. "Miss Reynolds remains under federal protection," the judge assured him. "Once the arrests are made, we'll determine the next steps." As they left the courthouse, Katherine seemed lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "It feels more real now," she said as they walked back toward the boarding house. "Like justice might actually be possible." "It is," Nathan assured her, though he knew the path ahead was still fraught with danger. Tanner wouldn't surrender easily, and even behind bars his influence could reach far. They spent the remainder of the day at the boarding house, Katherine writing letters to her aunt in St. Louis while Nathan made arrangements for supplies to take back to Diamond H whenever that might be. He found himself in no hurry to leave Topeka, to leave Katherine, despite the ranch responsibilities waiting for him. That evening, Mrs. Hollister prepared a special dinner to celebrate the successful deposition. Deputy Collins joined them at the table, his presence a reminder of the continuing threat even as they tried to enjoy a moment of normalcy. "Marshal Bennett is a good man," Collins remarked as they ate. "If anyone can bring Tanner in, it's him." "How many deputies will go with him?" Nathan asked, unable to shake his concern. "5, including myself," Collins replied. "I ride out with him at dawn." Katherine looked up sharply. "You're leaving?" Collins nodded. "Deputy Wilson will take over protection duty here. He's one of our best." The news did little to ease Nathan's unease. If half the federal marshals in Topeka were riding out to arrest Tanner, that left fewer men to protect Katherine if Tanner's associates made a move against her. Later, after Collins had retired to prepare for the morning ride and Mrs. Hollister had gone to bed, Nathan and Katherine found themselves alone in the small parlor. A single lamp burned low, casting soft shadows across the room. "You're worried," Katherine observed, studying his face. Nathan saw no point in denying it. "Tanner is dangerous, especially when cornered, and you're the key witness against him." "I know," she said simply. "But I can't hide forever, Nathan. This is the only way forward." He moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "I've been thinking. After Bennett leaves tomorrow, maybe we should consider moving you somewhere less obvious than a federal safe house." "Where?" "There's a hotel on the other side of town. Less conspicuous. I could take a room there and you could stay with me." Seeing her raised eyebrow, he added quickly, "I'd take the floor, of course. It would just be a precaution, having someone you trust nearby." Katherine considered the suggestion. Deputy Wilson might object to the change in plans. "Let me worry about that," Nathan said. "Your safety is what matters." She studied him for a long moment, then reached out to touch his cheek gently. "You've become quite protective of me, Mr. Hayes." "I have," he admitted, covering her hand with his own. "More than is probably wise given the circumstances." A small smile touched her lips. Wisdom seems to have little to do with matters of the heart. The simple acknowledgement of what had been growing between them, this unexpected connection forged in danger and grief, hung in the air between them. Nathan leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Katherine met him halfway, her lips soft against his as they shared a kiss more deliberate than their brief exchange on the porch the previous night. When they separated, Katherine's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if savoring the sensation. Then she looked at him, her expression both vulnerable and resolute. "When this is over," she said quietly, "when Tanner is behind bars and I've testified at his trial, I'd like to see Diamond H again." In happier circumstances, Nathan felt a lightness in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. "I'd like that too." The peaceful moment was shattered by the sudden crash of breaking glass from upstairs, followed by a heavy thud and a muffled shout. Nathan was on his feet instantly, drawing his revolver from its holster. "Stay here," he ordered Katherine, already moving toward the stairs. Deputy Collins appeared at the top of the staircase, his own gun drawn. "Someone tried to come through the window," he reported tersely. "I got a shot off, but they fled. Mrs. Hollister is unharmed." Nathan turned to find Katherine standing behind him, fear evident in her eyes but her composure intact. "We need to move," he said. "Now. My hotel idea just became more urgent." Collins hesitated only briefly before nodding in agreement. "I'll escort you. Let's go out the back, avoid any watchers at the front." They moved quickly, Katherine pausing only to grab her shawl and the small bag containing the few possessions she'd acquired since fleeing her farm. Mrs. Hollister, shaken but resolute, wished them Godspeed as they slipped out through the kitchen door into the alley behind the boarding house. The streets of Topeka were quiet, most businesses closed for the night. Collins led them through back alleys and side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where Tanner's men might be watching. The Western Star Hotel was a modest 3-story building near the railroad station, busy enough with travelers that new faces wouldn't draw attention but respectable enough to provide security. Collins spoke briefly with the night clerk, arranging for a room under a false name. "I'll stay on guard tonight," the deputy told them as they climbed the stairs to the second floor. "Marshal Bennett should know about this development. I'll send word first thing in the morning." The room was simple but clean: a double bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a washstand in the corner. Katherine moved to the window, carefully checking the street below without exposing herself to view. "You think they followed us?" she asked. "I don't believe so," Collins replied, "but I'll keep watch to be sure. Try to get some rest, both of you. Tomorrow may be a long day." After the deputy took up position in the hallway outside their door, Nathan secured the room, checking the window latch and moving one of the chairs to block the door. Katherine watched him silently, her face pale but composed. "I'm sorry about this," she said finally. I've brought nothing but danger into your life." Nathan shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for, Katherine. None of this is your fault." "Still," she insisted, "you could be safely back at your ranch instead of hiding in a hotel room with a woman being hunted by murderers." Despite the gravity of the situation, Nathan found himself smiling. "When you put it that way, it does sound rather dramatic." A reluctant laugh escaped her, easing some of the tension from her shoulders. "My life was quite ordinary before all this. Quiet, predictable. Do you miss it?" Nathan asked, genuinely curious. Katherine considered the question, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "I miss my father. I miss our home." She looked up at Nathan, her blue eyes steady. "But I don't regret meeting you, even under these circumstances." The simple honesty of her statement touched something deep within him. Nathan crossed the room to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "When I found you in that cornfield," he said quietly, "I had no idea how much you would come to mean to me in such a short time." Katherine leaned against him, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. "It's strange, isn't it? How life can change so completely in just a few days." They sat like that for some time, drawing comfort from each other's presence as the night deepened around them. Eventually, exhaustion began to claim them both. "You should take the bed," Nathan said, standing reluctantly. "I'll make do with the floor." Katherine looked up at him, something unspoken in her eyes. "There's room enough for both of us," she said softly. "Just to sleep. I don't want to be alone tonight." The propriety Nathan had been raised with warred briefly with his desire to provide comfort and his own need for the reassurance of her presence. In the end, there was really no decision to make. "All right," he agreed. They lay down fully clothed atop the coverlet, a respectful distance between them at first. But as the night wore on and sleep claimed them, that distance gradually disappeared until Katherine was nestled against Nathan's side, his arm protectively around her shoulders, both finding in each other's presence a peace that had eluded them separately. Dawn broke with a commotion in the hallway outside their room. Nathan was instantly awake, reaching for his revolver as he disentangled himself from Katherine, who stirred sleepily beside him. "Hayes, Miss Reynolds." Deputy Collins's voice came through the door, urgent but controlled. "It's me." "Open up." Nathan moved the chair and unlocked the door, gun still ready. Collins stepped inside, his expression grim. "Marshal Bennett and the deputies rode out an hour ago to serve the warrants," he reported without preamble. "But we've got a problem." Judge Harmon was found dead in his home this morning, apparent heart attack. Katherine sat up, fully alert now. "What? But he was fine yesterday," Collins's mouth set in a hard line. "Too convenient if you ask me, especially with this." He held up a folded paper. "Notice from the territorial governor's office, delivered just now to the courthouse. All proceedings against James Tanner are to be suspended pending review by the governor himself." Nathan felt a cold anger building within him. "Tanner's pulling strings." "It appears so," Collins agreed grimly. "The governor's always been friendly to railroad interests. With Judge Harmon dead and these new orders, the arrest warrants may be rescinded before Bennett can serve them." "What does this mean for Katherine?" Nathan demanded. The deputy ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Without a judge to hear her testimony or authorize continued protection, officially, there's not much we can do." "Officially," Katherine picked up on the qualification. Collins lowered his voice, though they were alone in the room. "Bennett suspected something like this might happen. He left instructions. If anything interfered with the legal process, I was to get you both out of Topeka immediately. He has a friend, a former marshal, who runs a trading post near the Colorado border. You'd be safe there until Bennett can sort this out." Nathan exchanged a look with Katherine. "How far?" "4 days' hard ride," Collins replied. I've already arranged for horses and supplies. We need to leave within the hour before word spreads that the case is suspended. Katherine stood, her decision already made. I'll be ready. As Collins left to make final preparations, Nathan turned to Katherine. Are you sure about this? It means more running, more hiding. What choice do I have? She asked simply. If I stay, Tanner will find a way to silence me permanently, just like he did Judge Harmon. You believe the judge was murdered, don't you? Her blue eyes met his squarely. This is how far Tanner is willing to go, Nathan, a respected federal judge. What chance would I have on my own? She was right, and they both knew it. Nathan nodded grimly. All right, we go west. But when this is over, Katherine, when it's safe. When it's safe, she finished for him, stepping closer to place a hand on his chest. We'll figure out what comes next, together. The promise in her words gave Nathan a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Whatever danger lay ahead, they would face it together. And somehow, they would find a way through. Within the hour, they were riding out of Topeka, Deputy Collins leading the way with Nathan and Katherine following closely behind. They avoided the main roads, keeping to less traveled paths as they headed west across the Kansas prairie. The first day passed without incident, the summer heat beating down on them as they pushed their horses at a steady pace. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 30 miles, making camp in a small grove of trees near a stream. As Katherine prepared a simple meal from their provisions, Collins kept watch, his manner growing increasingly tense as the evening wore on. Something's not right, he finally said, returning to the campfire after scouting the perimeter. We're being followed. Nathan's hand moved instinctively to his revolver. Tanner's men, most likely, Collins confirmed grimly. I spotted tracks about a mile back, 3 riders moving cautiously, trying to stay hidden. Katherine looked up from the coffee she was brewing, her face pale in the firelight but her voice steady. How far behind us are they? Hard to say. Maybe an hour. Collins glanced at the darkening sky. We should move on after we eat. Put more distance between us before we rest. They ate quickly, extinguishing the fire and mounting up just as the first stars appeared overhead. The night was clear, the quarter moon providing enough light to navigate by as they continued westward. They rode until well past midnight, the horses growing weary beneath them. Finally, Collins called a halt in a shallow ravine that offered some protection from both the elements and prying eyes. We'll rest here for a few hours, he decided. I'll take first watch. Hayes, you're second. Too exhausted to argue, Katherine spread her bedroll in the shelter of a large boulder and was asleep almost instantly. Nathan watched her for a moment, concerned by the dark circles forming under her eyes, before joining Collins at the edge of their makeshift camp. You think we lost them? He asked quietly. The deputy's expression was grim in the moonlight. For now, maybe, but they know we're heading west. There are only so many routes we can take. And only so fast we can travel with 1 woman and 3 tired horses, Nathan added, voicing the concern that had been growing since they left Topeka. Collins nodded, understanding the implication. You're thinking we should split up? It might give Katherine a better chance, Nathan suggested. You could take her northwest toward the Colorado Territory while I head southwest, making sure I'm seen. Draw them off. The deputy considered the plan. It's risky, for you especially. I can handle myself, Nathan assured him, and Katherine's testimony is what matters. She needs to stay alive long enough to ensure Tanner faces justice. Collins studied him for a long moment. You care for her, more than just as a witness you're protecting. Nathan saw no point in denying it. Yes, the deputy sighed. I'll think about it. Get some rest now. I'll wake you for your watch in a few hours. Nathan returned to his bedroll, settling down a few feet from Katherine. Despite his exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as he considered the dangers still facing them and the growing certainty that he would do whatever it took to ensure Catherine's safety, even at the cost of his own. He must have dozed eventually, because the next thing he knew, Collins was shaking him awake. The night was still dark, but a faint lightening on the eastern horizon suggested dawn wasn't far off. "Your watch," Collins whispered, handing Nathan his rifle. "All quiet so far." Nathan took up position at the edge of the ravine, scanning the surrounding prairie for any sign of movement. The landscape was still, peaceful in the pre-dawn light, giving no indication of the danger they faced. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Nathan heard Katherine stirring behind him. She joined him at his lookout position, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face still soft with sleep. "Any sign of them?" she asked quietly. "Not yet," Nathan replied. "But that doesn't mean they're not out there." Katherine nodded, her gaze traveling across the vast expanse of prairie stretching before them. "It's beautiful, isn't it? All this open space. I used to find it frightening when we first moved to Kansas, so empty, so exposed. Now I find it comforting somehow." Nathan understood. After the war, he too had sought solace in the open plains, the vast sky overhead, the sense of possibility that came with so much uncharted territory. "When this is over," he said, "you could still have a life here, a home." She glanced at him, a small smile touching her lips. "At Diamond H, if you wanted," he replied, suddenly uncertain. "Or anywhere you chose. I just meant I know what you meant," she interrupted gently. "And yes, I think I would like that. A fresh start. Somewhere safe." The simplicity of her admission, the trust implicit in her words, filled Nathan with a fierce determination. Whatever it took, he would see her safely through this ordeal. Collins joined them, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about your suggestion, Hayes, about splitting up." Katherine looked between them, confusion evident on her face. "What suggestion?" Nathan hesitated, but Collins continued frankly. "Hayes suggested he could draw off our pursuers, give us a better chance of reaching Colorado safely." "No," Katherine said immediately, turning to Nathan with alarm. "Absolutely not. That's too dangerous." "It makes tactical sense," Nathan argued gently. "One rider can move faster, be more elusive, and you're the one they really want to stop." "I won't have you risking your life as a decoy," Katherine insisted, a flash of fire in her blue eyes. "We stay together." Collins watched their exchange with a thoughtful expression. "There might be another option," he said finally. "A compromise. There's a military outpost about 40 miles northwest of here. If we can reach it, you'd both be under Army protection. I could then double back, try to lead any pursuers away from your trail." Nathan considered the plan. An Army outpost would certainly provide better security than their small group could manage on their own. "How long would it take to reach this outpost?" "A day and a half, pushing hard," Collins estimated. "We'd need to cross the Republican River, but I know a ford that should be passable this time of year." Katherine looked between the two men, clearly torn between concern for their safety and the practical necessities of their situation. "And after we reach the outpost, what then?" "The commanding officer there is Captain Robert Lawson," Collins explained. "He's a good man, respected. He could arrange an escort to take you the rest of the way to Colorado if necessary." Nathan nodded slowly. "It's a sound plan. Better than separating now, in open country." After a quick breakfast of hardtack and jerky, they broke camp and continued northwest, pushing their tired horses as hard as they dared. The day grew hot as the sun climbed higher, the vast prairie offering little shade. By midday, they had covered about 15 miles, the horses showing signs of strain. They paused briefly at a small creek to water the animals and rest in the meager shade of a lone cottonwood tree. "How much further to the river?" Katherine asked, splashing water on her face to cool her sun-flushed skin. "About 10 miles, Collins replied, studying the horizon with a concerned expression. "But we've got another problem." Nathan followed his gaze. In the distance, a smudge of darkness was visible against the blue sky smoke, rising in a thick column. "Prairie fire," he suggested, though the season was wrong for a natural blaze. Collins shook his head grimly. "Too localized, and too coincidental. I'd wager that's right along the route to the ford we need to cross." "Tanner's men," Nathan concluded. "They're trying to force us to change course. Or delay us until they can catch up," Collins agreed. "Either way, we need to keep moving. We'll skirt around to the east, find another crossing point." They remounted, pushing on at an angle away from the distant smoke. The detour would cost them valuable time and energy, but they had no choice if they wanted to avoid riding directly into a potential ambush. The afternoon wore on, the heat becoming oppressive as they rode across the open prairie. Katherine, though clearly exhausted, made no complaint, her determination evident in the set of her jaw and the straight line of her back as she rode. By late afternoon, they reached the Republican River, its waters running high and swift from recent rains upstream. Collins scouted along the bank for nearly a mile before finding a place where the river widened and grew shallower, creating a possible crossing point. "It's not ideal," he admitted as they surveyed the rushing water, "but it's our best option unless we want to ride another 10 miles downstream." Nathan assessed the crossing with a practiced eye. The water looked to be about 4 feet deep at its center, swift but not dangerously so. Their horses could manage it, though it wouldn't be pleasant. "We'll go one at a time," he decided. "I'll go first to test the footing." Without waiting for argument, Nathan urged his horse forward into the water. The animal snorted in protest but obeyed, stepping carefully as the water rose around its legs. The current was stronger than it had appeared from the bank, pushing against horse and rider as they made their way across. About halfway across, Nathan's horse stumbled slightly on the rocky riverbed but quickly regained its footing. By the time they reached the opposite bank, both were thoroughly soaked but otherwise unharmed. Nathan turned to wave the others forward. Collins went next, leading Katherine's horse by a length of rope to provide additional security. The deputy made the crossing without incident, his horse seeming more accustomed to water than Nathan's had been. Katherine followed, her face set with determination as her mare entered the river. The smaller horse struggled more against the current, water rising higher against its flanks. Katherine kept a firm hand on the reins, guiding the animal steadily forward. They were almost across when disaster struck. A large branch, carried downstream by the current, collided with the mare's legs, causing the animal to panic. Katherine cried out as the horse reared, nearly throwing her into the rushing water. Nathan was in the river instantly, spurring his own mount back into the current. He reached Katherine just as she was slipping from the saddle, her hands losing their grip on the wet reins. With a swift movement, he grasped her around the waist, pulling her onto his own horse as her mare broke free and scrambled toward the bank. "Hold on," he instructed, feeling Katherine's arms wrapped tightly around his waist as they forded the remaining distance to shore. Collins had already caught Katherine's horse, which stood dripping and trembling on the bank. "Are you all right?" he called as Nathan's mount finally reached solid ground. "We're fine," Nathan replied, helping Katherine dismount. She was thoroughly soaked, her hair plastered to her head, water streaming from her clothes, but appeared otherwise unharmed. "Thank you," she said breathlessly. looking up at Nathan with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper that made his heart quicken despite the danger of their situation. "We need to keep moving," Collins urged, glancing anxiously at the sky where the sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "We've lost time with this crossing, and we're still a good 25 miles from the outpost." They remounted, Katherine now riding double with Nathan as her mare had lost a saddlebag in the river crossing and needed to travel lighter. The forced proximity was both a comfort and a distraction as they continued northwest, the wet clothes gradually drying in the warm afternoon air. As dusk approached, Collins called another halt, this time at a small rise that offered a view of the surrounding prairie. While Katherine saw to the horses, the deputy motioned Nathan aside. "Riders," he said quietly, pointing to the southeast. "At least 4 of them, moving fast." "They've picked up our trail." Nathan squinted against the fading light. In the distance, he could just make out the dust kicked up by approaching horsemen. "How far?" "Maybe 5 miles. They'll be on us before dawn if we camp here." "Then we don't camp," Nathan decided. "We ride through the night." "How far to the outpost?" 20 miles, give or take, over rough country in the dark." Collins shook his head doubtfully. "It's risky. Riskier than waiting here for Tanner's men to find us." The deputy conceded the point with a grim nod. "We'll need to pace the horses carefully. They're already tired." They explained the situation to Katherine, who accepted the news with the same quiet resolve she'd shown throughout their journey. "Whatever we need to do," she said simply, checking the cinch on Nathan's saddle before they remounted. As full darkness descended, they set out again, moving at a steady walk to conserve the horses' strength. The moon, just past its first quarter, provided enough light to navigate by, though they had to proceed with caution over the uneven terrain. Katherine rode behind Nathan, her arms around his waist, her body warm against his back. Despite their precarious situation, he found himself acutely aware of her presence, of the trust she placed in him, of the connection that had grown between them through danger and shared purpose. "Tell me about Diamond H," she said softly after they had ridden in silence for some time. "What's it like when there isn't a crisis happening?" Nathan smiled at the question, recognizing her attempt to distract them both from the tension of their pursuit. "Peaceful, mostly. Busy during calving season and the cattle drives, quieter in winter. There's good grazing land, plenty of water. The house needs work. I built it myself when I first came to Kansas, and I'm a better rancher than a carpenter." "It sounds lovely," Katherine murmured, her voice wistful. "It can be," Nathan agreed. "Lonely sometimes, though. Just me and Mrs. Holloway and the ranch hands who come and go with the seasons." Katherine's arms tightened slightly around his waist. "Do you ever regret it, coming to Kansas, starting over after the war?" Nathan considered the question, aware of the deeper meaning behind it. "No," he said finally. "There were hard times, especially at first, but I needed the space, the chance to build something of my own after all the destruction I'd seen. Kansas offered that. And now?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the horses' hooves. "Now," Nathan replied, covering one of her hands with his own, "I'm finding there might be more to life than just building a ranch and keeping to myself." He felt rather than saw her smile, her cheek pressed against his back. They rode on through the night, the vast prairie surrounding them, the stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. Sometime after midnight, Collins signaled another halt, this time at the edge of a small wooded area that offered some concealment. "We need to rest the horses," he explained. "Just for an hour, then we push on to the outpost." They dismounted stiffly, legs cramped from hours in the saddle. While Collins checked their back trail, Nathan helped Katherine stretch her sore muscles. "How are you holding up?" he asked, concerned by the fatigue evident in her face. "I'm all right," she assured him, though her exhaustion was clear in the droop of her shoulders. "Just ready for this to be over." "It will be soon," Nathan promised, wishing he felt as confident as he tried to sound. "Once we reach the outpost, you'll be safe." Katherine looked up at him, her blue eyes serious in the moonlight. "And you? Will you stay with me or return to your ranch?" The question caught him off guard, though he realized it had been on his mind as well. "I'll stay," he said without hesitation. "As long as you need me." A small smile touched her lips. "And if I need you for quite some time." Nathan felt a warmth spread through his chest, a certainty that had been growing since he first found her hiding in that cornfield. "Then I'll be there," he said simply, "for as long as you want me." The moment was interrupted by Collins's return, his expression tense. "They're gaining on us," he reported quietly. "Maybe 3 miles back now. We need to move." They remounted quickly, pushing their tired horses to a faster pace as they continued northwest. The terrain grew rougher, rolling hills giving way to rocky outcroppings that forced them to pick their way carefully, even in their haste. Dawn was breaking when Collins finally pointed ahead to a distant rise. "There," he said with evident relief. "Fort Wallace. Another 4 miles." The sight of the American flag flying over the outpost gave them renewed energy. They urged their exhausted mounts forward, hope rising with the sun at their backs. They were less than 2 miles from the fort when the first shot rang out. "Ride!" Collins shouted, drawing his revolver and turning his horse to face their pursuers, now visible on the ridge behind them. "Get to the fort." Nathan hesitated, torn between the need to get Katherine to safety and his reluctance to leave the deputy to face their attackers alone. "Go." Collins insisted. "I'll hold them off." With a grim nod, Nathan spurred his horse forward, one arm wrapped protectively around Katherine as they galloped toward the fort. Behind them, more shots echoed across the prairie as Collins engaged their pursuers. The gates of Fort Wallace stood open as they approached, soldiers already alerted by the sound of gunfire. Nathan rode straight in, calling out for the commanding officer as they dismounted in the dusty parade ground. A tall officer in a Union Army uniform strode toward them, taking in their disheveled appearance with a quick, assessing glance. "I'm Captain Lawson," he introduced himself. "What's happening out there?" "Deputy Marshal Collins sent us," Nathan explained rapidly. "We're being pursued by men working for James Tanner." The deputy stayed behind to hold them off. Lawson immediately turned to a sergeant standing nearby. "Thompson, take a squad and ride out to assist the deputy. Move." As the soldiers mounted up and galloped out of the fort, Lawson turned back to Nathan and Katherine. "Come with me. You can explain the situation fully once you're settled." He led them to his office, a sparse but tidy room in the headquarters building. A young lieutenant brought coffee and hardtack while Katherine briefly recounted the events that had led them to Fort Wallace. "James Tanner," Lawson said thoughtfully when she had finished. "The name's familiar. Railroad investor, isn't he?" "Among other things," Nathan replied grimly. "He's also responsible for Edward Reynolds' murder and Judge Harmon's death in Topeka." The captain's eyebrows rose. "Serious allegations. And you're prepared to testify to this in court, Miss Reynolds?" "Yes, sir," Katherine affirmed, "if I can stay alive long enough to do so." "You'll be safe here," Lawson assured her. "Fort Wallace may be a frontier outpost, but we maintain law and order in this territory." A commotion outside drew their attention. Lawson moved to the window, his expression darkening as he observed whatever was happening in the parade ground. "Stay here," he instructed, striding toward the door. Nathan followed anyway, with Katherine close behind. In the parade ground, the squad of soldiers had returned, one of them cradling a body across his saddle. "Deputy Collins," Katherine whispered, her hand finding Nathan's as they watched the soldiers gently lower the fallen lawman to the ground. Sergeant Thompson approached Captain Lawson, his face grim. "He was already down when we got there, sir. Took at least 2 bullets. The attackers fled when they saw us coming, 4 riders heading east." "And the deputy?" Lawson asked quietly. Thompson shook his head. "Didn't make it, sir. He was gone before we reached him." Catherine's grip on Nathan's hand tightened, a small sound of distress escaping her. Nathan put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as they both absorbed the reality of Collins's sacrifice. "He died protecting us," she said softly, tears welling in her eyes. "Because of me. Because of my testimony." "Because of Tanner," Nathan corrected gently. "Don't take that burden on yourself, Katherine. Collins knew the risks. He was doing his duty." Captain Lawson rejoined them, his expression somber. "I'm sorry about the deputy. He was a good man." "What happens now?" Nathan asked, still holding Katherine protectively. "We bury Deputy Collins with military honors," Lawson replied. "And I send a telegraph to the federal authorities in Denver about what's happened. In the meantime, you'll both remain here under Army protection." True to his word, Lawson arranged quarters for them within the fort's separate but adjoining rooms in the officers' building, with a soldier posted outside for additional security. After seeing Katherine settled, Nathan sought out the captain again. "I need to send word to my ranch," he explained. "Let my foreman know what's happened, and that I'll be delayed longer than expected." Lawson nodded. "Of course. I'll have a rider take your message to the nearest telegraph office in Hays City. It's a day's ride each way." As Nathan wrote his brief message to Tom Riley, explaining the situation without revealing too many details that might put others at risk, he found himself thinking about the future, about what would happen after this immediate danger had passed. Catherine's testimony was still crucial to bringing Tanner to justice, but with Judge Harmon dead and the territorial governor apparently in Tanner's pocket, the path forward was uncertain. And yet, amid all this danger and uncertainty, Nathan had found something unexpected, a connection with Katherine that went beyond their shared ordeal, a possibility of happiness he had long since stopped believing was possible for him. That evening, after Deputy Collins had been laid to rest in the fort's small cemetery with full military honors, Nathan found Katherine sitting alone on a bench outside her quarters, watching the sunset paint the western sky in vivid oranges and purples. "May I join you?" he asked, though they had long since moved past such formalities. She nodded, making room for him on the bench. "I've been thinking about what happens next," she said after a moment of companionable silence. "About my testimony about Tanner. Captain Lawson believes the federal authorities in Denver will take over the case," Nathan told her, "away from the territorial governor's influence. And if they do, if Tanner is finally arrested and brought to trial," she turned to look at him directly. "What then, Nathan?" He understood the real question she was asking. "Then, if you're willing, I'd like to take you back to Diamond H, not as a guest or someone under protection, but as—" He hesitated, suddenly uncertain of his words despite the certainty in his heart. "As what?" Katherine prompted gently. Nathan took her hand in his, the gesture now familiar and yet still filled with significance. "As someone I've come to care for deeply, someone I'd like to build a future with, if you feel the same." In the fading light, he saw tears well in her blue eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I do feel the same," she whispered. "Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I've found something with you that I never expected to find again after losing Papa. A sense of belonging, of possibility." Nathan's heart swelled with emotion as he leaned forward to kiss her. A gentle, reverent meeting of lips that held all the promise of their future together. When they separated, Katherine rested her forehead against his, a peaceful expression on her face for the first time since he'd found her hiding in the cornfield. "It may still be a long road ahead," he cautioned, unwilling to minimize the challenges they still faced. "Tanner is powerful, determined." "So are we," Katherine replied with quiet conviction. "And we have truth on our side. That has to count for something in this world." As darkness fell over Fort Wallace, they sat together, planning and dreaming of the life they might build once justice was served, a life at Diamond H, with wide open skies and the promise of peace after the storm. The next morning brought news from Denver. Captain Lawson called them to his office, his expression cautiously optimistic as he read from the telegraph he'd received. "The federal circuit judge in Denver has taken personal interest in the case," he reported. "He's issued new arrest warrants for Tanner and his associates and dispatched a team of federal marshals to execute them. They've also requested that Miss Reynolds be escorted to Denver to give her testimony directly." "When would we leave?" Katherine asked. "A military escort will be ready by tomorrow," Lawson replied. "6 soldiers under Lieutenant Parker's command. They'll see you safely to Denver." Nathan nodded his approval of the plan. "And I'll accompany them." Lawson raised an eyebrow but didn't object. "As you wish, Mr. Hayes." The additional gun would be welcome if there's trouble on the road. The journey to Denver took 5 days, their pace steady but cautious as they traveled through the Colorado Territory. Lieutenant Parker proved to be a capable leader, maintaining vigilant security while ensuring Katherine's comfort as much as possible under the circumstances. Throughout the journey, Nathan remained constantly at Katherine's side, their bond deepening with each passing day. They spoke of the future of Diamond H, of the life they might build together once this ordeal was behind them. In those quiet conversations, riding side by side across the vast landscape, they found moments of normalcy and joy amid the continuing tension of their situation. Denver greeted them with the bustle and energy of a rapidly growing frontier city. The federal courthouse, an imposing stone building in the center of town, stood as a symbol of the law's reach even in these western territories. Judge Samuel Whitman, a stern-faced man with piercing gray eyes and a reputation for absolute integrity, received them in his chambers immediately upon their arrival. He listened intently as Katherine once again recounted the events at her father's farm and the subsequent threats against her life. "Miss Reynolds," the judge said when she had finished, "your courage is commendable. Few witnesses would persist in the face of such dangerous opposition." "My father taught me that standing up for what's right is worth any risk," Katherine replied simply. Whitman nodded approvingly. "A wise man, your father. His memory is well served by your determination." He turned to a clerk standing nearby. "Has there been any word from the marshals sent to apprehend Tanner?" "Not yet, Your Honor," the clerk replied, "but they should report in within the next day or 2. "Very well." The judge turned back to Katherine and Nathan. "Until Tanner is in custody, you'll remain under protection here in Denver. I've arranged accommodations at the Windsor Hotel, the finest in the city, and well guarded by my most trusted deputies." The Windsor Hotel proved to be as grand as the judge had suggested, a 4-story structure of red brick with elegant furnishings, and every modern convenience. Katherine was given a spacious suite on the 3rd floor, with Nathan in an adjoining room and armed deputies positioned in the hallway. After weeks of danger and rough travel, the luxury was almost disorienting. Katherine stood in the center of her room, running her fingers over the fine silk bedspread with an expression of bemused wonder. "It feels strange," she admitted when Nathan joined her after speaking with the deputies. "To be somewhere so civilized, so normal when everything else in my life has been turned upside down. Nathan understood. After the war, he had experienced similar moments of disconnect, the ordinary suddenly seeming extraordinary after prolonged exposure to danger and hardship. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he advised with a smile. "Soon enough we'll be back on the prairie with only Mrs. Holloway's cooking and my poor carpentry to keep us comfortable." Catherine's eyes lit up at the casual reference to their shared future. "I look forward to it," she said softly. "To building a life that's ours, not defined by Tanner or what he did." The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo of waiting, comfortable but tense, as they anticipated news of Tanner's capture. They ventured out only briefly, with deputies as escorts, to purchase new clothing and necessities for Katherine to replace what had been lost in their flight from her farm. On the evening of the second day, a knock at Katherine's door revealed Judge Whitman himself, accompanied by a tall, weather-beaten man wearing a marshal's badge. "Miss Reynolds, Mr. Hayes," the judge greeted them, his expression giving nothing away. "This is Chief Marshal Everett. He has news regarding James Tanner." They invited the men in, Katherine's hand finding Nathan's as they braced for whatever information the marshal brought. "We located Tanner at his hunting lodge near the Kansas-Colorado border," Everett reported without preamble. "He resisted arrest. In the ensuing gunfight, he was killed, along with 2 of his associates. Miller, his foreman, and the man you identified as one of your father's killers was captured alive." Katherine's grip on Nathan's hand tightened, her face a complex mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, and a hint of regret that justice would now come through death rather than trial. "Miller has agreed to testify against the remaining conspirators," Everett continued, "including several officials in the territorial government who were taking bribes to overlook Tanner's land-grabbing schemes. It appears Judge Harmon's death was indeed murder poison administered by someone on Tanner's payroll." "So it's over," Katherine said quietly. "Truly over." "The immediate danger to you is, yes," Judge Whitman confirmed. "Though we will still need your testimony at Miller's trial and in the proceedings against the corrupt officials. But those trials will be conducted here in Denver, under my jurisdiction and with full federal protection." Nathan felt the tension he'd carried for weeks begin to ease. "And after the trials, Katherine will be free to return to Kansas, to rebuild her life however she sees fit," the judge agreed. "The federal government will ensure that the title to her father's land is cleared of any claims Tanner might have filed, though I understand the farmhouse itself was destroyed." "It was," Katherine confirmed, "but the land remains, and there are other possibilities for my future now." She glanced at Nathan, a soft smile touching her lips. Judge Whitman observed the exchange with perceptive eyes. "I see," he said, a hint of approval in his tone. "Well, Miss Reynolds, it seems you have found something valuable amid this tragedy. I wish you both well." After the judge and marshal departed, Katherine and Nathan stood together at the window of her hotel room, looking out over the growing city of Denver as twilight descended. "It doesn't feel quite real yet," Katherine admitted. "That it's over. That Tanner can't hurt anyone else." "It will take time," Nathan said gently, "for the reality to sink in, for the fear to fade." She turned to face him, her blue eyes clear and direct. "But we have time now, don't we? Time to build something new, something good." Nathan drew her into his arms, holding her close as the last light of day faded from the sky. "Yes," he promised, "all the time we need." Miller's trial was held 3 weeks later, a swift proceeding given the foreman's cooperation and full confession. Katherine testified with quiet dignity, recounting once more the events of that terrible evening at her father's farm. Nathan sat in the courtroom throughout, a steady presence offering silent support. The verdict was never in doubt. Miller was sentenced to 20 years in the federal penitentiary for his role in Edward Reynolds' murder and the subsequent conspiracy. The corrupt officials implicated in Tanner's schemes faced their own trials in the months that followed, most receiving substantial prison terms. By late September, with Katherine's testimony complete and no further legal obligations requiring her presence in Denver, they were finally free to return to Kansas. The journey back was unhurried, a stark contrast to their flight westward months earlier. They traveled by stagecoach and then by train once they reached the railroad, the miles passing peacefully beneath cloudy autumn skies. As they approached Whispering Creek, Katherine grew quiet, gazing out the train window at the familiar landscape rolling past. "Are you all right?" Nathan asked, covering her hand with his own. She nodded, though her expression remained pensive. "Just thinking about how much has changed since I last saw this place, about Papa, about the farm." She turned to look at Nathan directly. "About us, having second thoughts?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice despite everything they had shared. "No," Katherine replied firmly, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. "Never that, just acknowledging the journey, all that was lost and all that was found." When they disembarked at the small Whispering Creek station, Tom Riley was waiting with the wagon, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile at the sight of them. "Welcome home, boss," he greeted Nathan, before touching his hat respectfully to Katherine. "Miss Reynolds, it's good to see you both safe and sound." The ride to Diamond H took them past what remained of the Reynolds farm. At Katherine's request, they stopped briefly, allowing her to walk alone among the charred ruins of the house where she had grown up. Nathan watched from a distance as she knelt to touch the earth, her head bowed in a private moment of farewell. When she returned to the wagon, there were tears on her cheeks but a sense of peace in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I needed to see it, to say goodbye properly." Diamond H welcomed them with the warm glow of lamps in the windows and Mrs. Holloway waiting on the porch, arms outstretched to embrace Katherine as if she were a long-lost daughter returned home. "Look at you, my dear," the housekeeper fussed, holding Katherine at arm's length to examine her. "Too thin by half. Well, we'll soon fix that. I've got a proper dinner waiting and your room is all prepared." Katherine glanced at Nathan, a question in her eyes. He nodded slightly, confirming what they had discussed during their journey home. "Mrs. Holloway," Katherine said, turning back to the older woman with a smile. "There's something Nathan and I would like to tell you." They shared the news over dinner that Nathan had proposed during their last week in Denver, and Katherine had accepted. That they planned to be married before the first snow fell, in a simple ceremony at Diamond H with their small circle of friends in attendance. Mrs. Holloway's joy was uncontained. "I knew it," she declared triumphantly. "From the moment he brought you here, I told myself, Abigail, that girl is exactly what this ranch needs and what Mr. Hayes has been missing all these years." The wedding took place on a crisp October day, the prairie dressed in autumn gold beneath a perfect blue sky. Pastor Evans from the small church in Whispering Creek performed the ceremony on the front porch of the ranch house, with Mrs. Holloway, Tom Riley, and the ranch hands as witnesses. Katherine wore a simple gown of ivory silk purchased in Denver. Her dark hair, adorned with wildflowers gathered that morning from the meadow behind the house. Nathan, more nervous than he had ever been facing Tanner's men, stood in his best suit, watching in wonder as she walked toward him across the yard. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Evans began, his voice carrying clearly in the still autumn air. "We are gathered here today to join this man, and this woman in holy matrimony. The words of the ceremony washed over them, familiar and timeless, as Nathan and Katherine pledged themselves to each other to share in life's joys and sorrows, to support and cherish one another through whatever the future might bring. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor concluded with a broad smile. "You may kiss your bride." As Nathan drew Katherine into his arms for their first kiss as a married couple, cheers erupted from the assembled guests, Mrs. Holloway dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Tom and the ranch hands whistled and applauded. The celebration continued well into the evening, with dancing on the swept earth of the yard to the music of a fiddle played by one of the ranch hands. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Nathan found a moment alone with his bride, drawing her away from the festivities to the quiet of the front porch. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they looked out over the land that was now their shared home. "Completely," Katherine replied, leaning back against his chest with a contented sigh. "It feels right, being here with you. Like this is where I was always meant to be." Nathan pressed a kiss to her temple, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a chance encounter in a cornfield to a love that had survived danger, loss, and uncertainty, to emerge stronger for all it had weathered. "I love you, Katherine Hayes," he murmured against her hair, "more than I ever thought possible." She turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, her eyes shining in the lamplight spilling from the windows. "And I love you, Nathan Hayes, my protector, my partner, my home." In the years that followed, Diamond H Ranch flourished under their joint care. The house was expanded, with Nathan's carpentry skills improving under Katherine's patient guidance. Gardens were planted, trees grew tall, and children's laughter eventually filled the rooms that had once known only solitude. The memory of Edward Reynolds was honored in their eldest son, a boy with his grandfather's steadfast character and his mother's bright blue eyes. The past was not forgotten, but neither did it cast a shadow over the joy they found in each new day together. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the breeze stirred the tall grass of the prairie, Nathan would look at his wife and remember that first moment, finding her hiding in a cornfield, speaking her name softly, promising she was safe. A promise he had kept through danger and trial, across miles and years, building with her a life rich in love and the peace they had both sought for so long.